Hey there, welcome to True Nightmares. Tonight, you're getting calm, creepy, true stories to keep you company while you fall asleep. If you enjoy this kind of dark, sleepy atmosphere, please like the video and subscribe so you always have something eerie to drift off to. For a while, I worked a hybrid job with a normal 9-to-5 schedule. Some days we worked from home, and other days we met in person at the lab. On those in-person days, our main focus was running experiments and doing research. There were only 5 of us on the team, but the lab was so large and open that it often felt like we had the entire floor to ourselves. We weren't very loud or social as a group, but we were comfortable with each other and had an easy rhythm to our days. One winter afternoon, we had an in-person day with just one last meeting on the calendar. Our department head, Janice, was coming by for a short check-in. Our manager, Jack, seemed happy with our progress, and since it was the last meeting of the day, he suggested we grab coffee from the cafe across the street before we wrapped up. We all agreed. It felt good to step outside for a few minutes into the cold air, talking softly as we walked. The sun was already starting to fade, and the sky had that dim, early evening look that winter days get. Our lab was close to the main entrance of the building, so we weren't worried about walking through long, empty hallways or being too far from the front doors. We got back about 10 minutes before the meeting. I was walking behind Jack and another teammate, Ashley, and chatting quietly with Ryan and Brandon as we headed in. As we stepped into our section of the lab wing, the 3 of us at the back saw something that made us slow down. Ahead of us, in the hallway, a man we didn't recognize was walking away, moving toward the far end of the corridor. Right away, he looked out of place. Most people in our building wore business casual clothes: slacks, button-downs, neat shoes, or at least clean sweaters. Even the janitors and maintenance staff wore uniforms or clearly branded work clothes. This man, though, wore casual, wrinkled clothes and looked unkempt. His hair was messy, and the way he walked was strange, slow, almost drifting, but still purposeful. We only saw his back, but something about him made us all stop talking. When Jack and Ashley turned and noticed we were lagging behind, we told them we'd just seen someone walk away from our lab area. Jack didn't seem worried. He shrugged and said it was probably someone from another department working late. Ashley added, "Maybe he's maintenance or a contractor or something." That explanation made a little sense, so we tried to accept it. Still, the image of him didn't sit right with me. A few minutes later, Janice arrived. She always had a strong presence when she walked into the room, heels clicking, posture straight, and an air of confidence that made everyone pay attention. We put our coffees aside and took our places at our desks and stools. She joked lightly about how relaxed we looked, and then started sorting through her notes. At some point in the small talk before the meeting, Jack casually asked, "Hey, do we have a new lab technician coming in, or someone new working on this floor?" Janice frowned slightly. "Not that I know of. New hires go through headquarters, and I haven't heard about any new technicians. Why?" Jack explained, "We just saw someone leave from this wing. Thought maybe they were new." Janice shrugged. "I haven't met anyone new. The lab down the hall has been talking about renovations, though. Could be someone they hired for that." It sounded reasonable on the surface. None of us pushed the issue. Janice began setting up for our meeting, talking through goals and upcoming deadlines. Brandon and I were seated closest to the lab door, his workstation directly beside it, mine just a few feet behind. In the middle of Janice getting ready, the door suddenly opened. The man we had seen earlier stepped halfway into the lab. Brandon and I looked up at the same time. Seeing his face made the whole atmosphere in the room change. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost gray. He looked like someone who hadn't slept or gone outside in a very long time. His features were drawn and tired. The strangest part was his eyes. One eye was hazel, catching the lab lights and almost glowing golden. The other eye was a cloudy, dull white, like it had gone blind or was covered in some kind of film. The contrast was so sharp that my first instinct was to search for a logical explanation. Maybe he had a medical condition. Maybe he'd had an accident. Maybe he really was a maintenance worker. He leaned slightly into the doorway, resting a hand on the frame. In a quiet but clear voice, he said, "Hey, is everything okay in here? I'm working in this wing. Let me know if you have any electrical problems or malfunctions." Janice didn't even look up. Still focused on her papers, she answered, "We're fine, thank you." He gave a small smirk. letting his gaze slide from Janice to me, then to Brandon. There was something about the way he looked at us that felt too long, almost like he was taking note of our faces. Then he slowly closed the door and disappeared back into the hallway. Brandon and I exchanged a quick, uneasy look. Neither of us had to say anything. Ashley noticed us and asked if everything was okay. I mumbled something about needing the washroom and excused myself. The washroom was right across the hall. It was big, with several stalls lined up along one side, and a long mirror stretching across the sinks. When I walked in, it was nearly empty. Only one stall was in use. I went into another, took a moment to calm down, and then stepped back out to wash my hands. As I looked into the mirror, brushing my hands under the water, I saw him again. Through the open doorway behind me, reflected in the mirror, the same man passed by. He was walking down the hallway in the direction of our lab, holding what looked like a tool in one hand, maybe a screwdriver or some small instrument. My heart skipped. Instead of stepping out to follow, I turned and hurried back into one of the stalls, locking the door. My hands shook as I tried to quiet my breathing. The other woman in the washroom must have heard me rush back in. She called out softly, "Are you okay?" All I could manage was a whisper, "Shh." Then the washroom door opened with a slow creak. Silence. I didn't hear footsteps. No one walked past my stall. No shadows moved under the doors. For a few seconds, there was only the hum of the lights. Then one of the taps turned on by itself. Water ran for a short moment, then shut off again. The woman in the other stall opened her door cautiously. I heard it swing on its hinges. She stepped out and said in a low voice, "Hello?" Her voice echoed against the tiles. Then there was a small, sharp gasp from her. After that, nothing. No words, no footsteps, no sound of the door opening or closing, just silence again. I stood there, frozen in my stall, afraid to come out. Minutes crawled by. Eventually, I started to hear other sounds. Farther away down the hallway, doors opening and closing, voices talking as people finished their workday. That normal background noise finally gave me enough courage to unlock the door and step out. The washroom was empty. Everything seemed normal. No sign of the woman. No sign of him. The sinks were dry. The air felt heavy, like the last hint of a storm that had already passed. I went back across the hall to our lab, glancing behind me more than once. When I walked in, Brandon looked at me immediately. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I told him honestly. "Did that guy come back in here?" Brandon shook his head. "No, I haven't seen him since he stuck his head in earlier." "Why?" "I saw him again," I said quietly, "in the hallway. He was walking back toward our door with some kind of tool in his hand. I thought he was coming back in." Brandon watched me closely, his expression serious now. "No one came in," he repeated. "I've been sitting right here the whole time." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. The meeting with Janice went ahead as planned, though it was hard to focus on anything she said. She wrapped it up fairly quickly and left in a rush, saying she had another call to join. We packed up for the day, moving slower than usual. The room felt tense. Ryan and Ashley joked lightly, trying to shake off the weird mood, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. We finally left the lab together. Jack led the way, holding the door open with his back as he talked to us. The hallway toward the exit was dim but not dark. The windows near the main door showed the fading winter light outside. As Jack stood holding the door, he looked past us, back toward the lab wing. His expression changed mid-sentence. He stopped talking and lifted a hand in a half-apologetic gesture. "Hey, sorry," he called out to someone behind me. "Everything okay in there? That room's good, we were just in there." The rest of us turned. Standing by our lab door was the same man. He stood with one hand on the door handle, the door cracked slightly open behind him, wearing that small, unsettling smile. His eyes looked the same as before, one bright, one cloudy. He didn't say anything at first, just watched us. Jack sighed and walked back toward him. "Sorry," Jack said. "We must have left it unlocked." He reached past the man, pulled the door shut, and locked it. As Jack turned to come back toward us, the man's smile widened. Then he started to move. At first, he walked. Then, without warning, his walk shifted into a run. He charged toward Jack in a straight line. Jack's eyes widened. He spun around and ran back toward us. Everything happened at once. We all panicked and bolted for the exit together. The cold air hit our faces as we stumbled out into the parking lot. Behind us, echoing faintly through the hallway, we heard his laughter, a strange, hollow sound that didn't quite fit his calm voice from earlier. We didn't stop running until we reached our cars. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, looking at each other without knowing what to say. Eventually, we went our separate ways, texting each other later at home to make sure everyone was okay. The next morning, the lab felt different. The air seemed a little heavier, and every small noise, the squeak of a chair, the click of a pen, felt too loud. We all showed up on time, but no one talked much at first. Later in the morning, I had to deliver some documents to another department. On my way there, I ran into Penny, one of the admin staff. She was always cheerful and loved to chat, and that day she was carrying a stack of envelopes, smiling as she walked. We fell into step together, talking about small things, weather, deadlines, office gossip. Halfway down the hall, I asked, "Hey, do you know who the new hire is? The guy doing work on the lab down the hall from ours?" She looked genuinely confused. "New hire? There isn't one," she said. "That lab hired an outside company for some maintenance, but their workers leave by 3 at the latest. No one sticks around late. Why?" I hesitated. "Are you sure no one was still here after 4 yesterday?" I asked. Someone came by and asked if we were having electrical issues. He looked different. Penny frowned, thinking. "I'm sure," she said. "I was with Harry when we locked that lab up yesterday. No one should have been in that wing after we left. But I'll double check with the contractor list and let you know if anything comes up." "Thanks," I said quietly. Later, during lunch, Jack and I went by Penny's desk to follow up. She shook her head. "There wasn't anyone scheduled to be there at that time," she said. "No late shifts, no extra workers. Are you sure you didn't just see someone passing through?" Jack's jaw tightened. "We're sure," he replied. "We saw him. We all did." After that, we went to Janice to ask if she remembered the man who had poked his head into our lab and talked to her. She frowned and looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't remember anyone coming in during your meeting," she said. "I would remember that." We reminded her of the short exchange, the man asking if we had electrical issues, her saying everything was fine. She still shook her head. "No," she repeated. "I don't recall that at all." When we told the rest of the team what she had said, the room went quiet. There was nothing more to add. No security alert. No emails about unauthorized visitors. No record of a new worker. No one else on staff who matched his description. Eventually, the project in that lab wrapped up, and our team moved on to other assignments. We never saw the man again. None of us forgot him, though. When the topic came up, we would share glances and short comments, then let it drop. It became one of those strange, unexplained memories that everyone quietly agrees not to poke at too much. Even now, when I think back to that winter evening, I remember his eyes most of all, one bright, one dead. His calm voice asking if everything was okay. The sound of water turning on by itself in the washroom. His laughter echoing behind us as we ran for the door. And every time I walk down that hallway, even if it's just in memory, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there again, standing by an open door, watching, waiting, as if nothing about him was out of place at all. It happened a while ago, but it still feels close, like it could have happened just last night. At the time, I was home with my brother while my parents were out of state. They had gone to California for Thanksgiving to visit my aunt, who had just gone through a rough divorce. Because of that, the whole trip was emotional for them, and the house felt different without them there. It was quiet in a way I wasn't used to, no TV humming in the background, no random conversations, no footsteps in the hallway. It was just me and my brother for most of the day, each of us doing our own thing. By the evening, even my brother was gone. He had a sleepover at his best friend's house, so I knew I would be spending the night completely alone. That didn't bother me at first. Being home alone can feel peaceful when everything seems normal. I went to my room, climbed into bed, and lay there with my phone in my hand, scrolling through Snapchat Spotlight. I watched random clips, memes, and funny videos, not really paying attention to the time. It was one of those nights where your brain is half asleep while your fingers keep scrolling. That was when I first heard it. There was a knock on my bedroom door. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. The knocks came slowly and in an even rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was strange, though. It didn't sound like someone knocking with their fist. It didn't have that soft, dull sound of knuckles on wood. It sounded more like something hard, like a stick or a bat tapping gently but firmly against the door. Whatever it was, it felt deliberate, like someone was testing the door, not just knocking at random. My first thought was that my brother had come home early and was trying to scare me. It definitely sounded like something he would do. Sneak into the house, quietly go down the hall, and knock on my door to freak me out. But then I remembered, he wasn't home. He was at his friend's house for the night. The more I thought about that, the colder my body felt. I stared at my bedroom door, phone still in my hand, and tried to come up with a normal explanation. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe some pipes were knocking, or something outside had hit the wall. I told myself it was nothing serious. But then, the knocking started again. The same slow, careful rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. It felt too focused to be random. Back then, I had never heard of anything called a mimic. I didn't know there were stories about things that could copy human voices, pretend to be people you know, or lure you by sounding familiar. All I knew in that moment was that I was supposed to be alone in that house, and someone was on the other side of my door. Without thinking, I made the mistake that still haunts me. I spoke. I called out, "Who's there?" As soon as the words left my mouth, everything changed. Right after I spoke, I heard a voice answer from the hallway. At first, it sounded like an old woman's voice, rough, raspy, and shaky. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. But then, mid-word, it shifted. The tone smoothed out, the sound changed, and suddenly, it was my mother's voice. Not similar to her voice, not close, it was her voice. Exactly. The same pitch, the same warmth, the same way she normally talks to me. It was like someone had recorded her and was playing it back from the hallway. If I hadn't known she was in California, I would have believed without question that she was standing outside my door. My blood ran cold. My mom was hundreds of miles away. She was in another state. There had been no car in the driveway, no front door opening, no footsteps in the hallway. If she had walked into the house, I would have heard it. Our house is not that big. But I hadn't heard anything at all until that knocking and that voice. For a second, I tried to latch onto any explanation that made sense. Maybe the TV was on in the living room and I had forgotten. Maybe someone in a show just happened to sound exactly like my mother. That was the only thing my mind could come up with. I wanted so badly for it to be something simple like that. But then I remembered I hadn't turned on the TV at all that day. The more I thought about it, the less sense anything made. How could a TV copy my mom's voice word for word, tone for tone, as if she herself were speaking? It wasn't just close, it was perfect. That was when the fear truly hit me. I went completely quiet. I didn't want to speak again. I didn't want to give away any more of my attention or energy to whatever was out there. It felt like if I said another word, I would be giving it permission to come closer. My whole body felt tense. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Very carefully, I grabbed my phone, slid out of bed, and opened my closet door. I stepped inside and gently closed it behind me, moving as quietly as I could. In the dark closet, surrounded by clothes and shelves, I crouched down and dialed my mom's number. When she picked up, her voice sounded normal, tired, and a little distant, like she was busy with something. I whispered, "Where are you right now?" She answered casually, "We're in California." Hearing her say that confirmed the truth I already knew. She was nowhere near me. She was not in the hallway. She was not knocking on my door. Whatever was outside my room was not her. I didn't want to scare her or pile onto the stress she was already dealing with, so I just said, "Okay," and hung up quickly. Then I sat there in the dark, shaking. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through all kinds of possibilities: ghosts, someone sneaking into the house, a random hallucination, but none of it made me feel better. I pressed my knees to my chest and tried to stay as quiet as possible. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the knocking started again. This time it was louder, a lot louder. It no longer sounded like gentle tapping. It sounded like someone was smashing a hard object against the door, like a bat slamming into the wood. Bang, bang, bang. Each hit seemed stronger than the last. The sound shook through my body. It felt like the door might crack if it continued. I covered my mouth with my hand and started crying quietly. I didn't want to make a single sound that could let it know exactly where I was. I could feel the panic climbing higher with every hit on the door. Then the voice came back. It was still my mother's voice, but twisted. It sounded like it was being strained through something rough, giving it a scraped, damaged quality. The tone and pitch were hers, but there was no warmth in it anymore. There was something hollow and cold behind the words. It began repeating the same phrases. Hey, 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 I'm back. Hey, 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 I'm back. The way it said the words was wrong. It was as if someone only knew a few lines and was trying to sound casual, but ended up sounding mechanical. The repetition made it worse. It didn't sound like a person having a conversation. It sounded like a recording that someone kept hitting play on, over and over. Each hey made my skin crawl. Even through the fear, I wanted to know if this thing actually knew anything about my mother, or if it only knew her voice. I don't know where I found the nerve, but I shouted from the closet, "What's your name then?" Another knock. The voice didn't answer my question. It didn't say my name. It didn't say anything specific. It just kept going. Hey, 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 come out. I'm back now. I'm back now. Again and again. It was like whoever was speaking had no idea how my mom actually talked. It could copy how she sounded, but not what she would say. It stuck to a few short lines, like a broken toy trying to mimic a person. That made it even more terrifying, because it confirmed this wasn't just random noise. Something was trying to pretend to be her and failing in a very unnatural way. I stayed in that closet for what felt like hours. The knocking eventually softened, then faded. The voice grew quieter and finally stopped. The silence that followed didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy and strange, like the air itself was still watching me. I didn't come out right away. I waited and listened. No footsteps, no more banging, no more voice. Eventually, I forced myself to unlock the closet and step back into my room. Everything looked normal. The hallway outside my door was empty. The front door was locked. All the windows were closed. But normal didn't matter anymore. The house looked the same, but I knew it wasn't just in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the door, every tiny creak in the walls or pipes making my muscles tense. At some point, I started crying again, quietly, tired and scared, and wishing I could just erase the whole thing from my brain. I eventually drifted into a restless sleep, but the fear stayed. In the days and weeks afterward, I kept hearing that voice in my memory. The way it said, "Hey, I'm back," over and over. It was burned into my mind like a scar. Even when nothing strange was happening, the memory felt real and sharp, like it could come back at any time. Once I finally felt calm enough to think clearly, I started searching online. I typed things like, something copying my mom's voice, someone sounding like my mom when she wasn't home, and strange knocking and voice in empty house. I dug through posts, forums, personal stories, and articles. That was when I started seeing the word mimic. I learned that some people believe there are entities that can imitate voices perfectly, especially the voices of people you trust. They use those voices to call you, lure you, or make you open a door. People described experiences where something sounded exactly like a partner, a parent, or a friend, when that person was nowhere nearby. The more I read, the more my stomach turned. The patterns were familiar. Soft knocking that grows more aggressive. A voice that sounds exactly like someone you know. Repeating simple phrases over and over. Showing up when you're alone and vulnerable. Responding only after you speak first. Every detail lined up with what had happened to me. It felt like I was reading my own story on different screens, written by other people. That was when I accepted what I had already suspected deep down. What came to my door that night was not my mother. It was not the house. It wasn't a random noise or a dream I half remembered. To me, it was a mimic, something that knew my mom's voice well enough to use it against me. People who hear this story might not believe it. Some might say I was stressed, half asleep, or imagining things. Maybe they'll say it was the pipes, the wind, a neighbor's TV, or just my own mind playing tricks. Let them. It's easier to believe in simple explanations than to accept something we don't understand. But I know what I heard. I know how hard that knocking hit the door. I know the exact sound of my mother's voice repeating, "Hey, I'm back," from just outside my room while she was still in California. I know how it felt to sit in my closet, shaking and crying, trying not to make a sound while that thing tried to convince me to come out. I don't tell this story to impress anyone. It's not fun or entertaining for me. It's something that left real fear and anxiety behind. I still have nights where I lie awake, listening too closely to the silence. You can choose not to believe me. You can write it off as a weird night or a confused memory if that makes you feel safer. But in my heart, I know what knocked on my door and spoke with my mother's voice. Mimics are real, and once you've heard one for yourself, you never forget it. The old farmhouse was supposed to be a peaceful escape. It stood by itself in the Oregon wilderness, far from the nearest town, neighbor, or busy road. That distance from everything, no traffic, no neighbors, no internet or TV, was exactly what Elias wanted. He needed quiet. He wanted to be alone with his thoughts, away from noise, crowds, and constant notifications. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, no television, just the creaks of the old house, the whisper of the trees outside, and the deep, heavy silence of the forest all around. For the first 2 nights, everything was calm. Elias read books, cooked simple meals, and listened to the soft wind moving through the pines. The silence felt peaceful at first, almost comforting, like the world had paused just for him. The isolation felt like a warm blanket around his mind. But on the 3rd night, that quiet changed. The sound that broke it wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't start with a slam or a crash. It started small. Tap, 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 tap. Elias barely looked up at first. He was sitting in a worn chair with a book in his hands, so he tried to ignore it, assuming it was his imagination or the house settling. Old houses make noises. They pop and creak, but the tapping didn't stop. It came again steady, slow, and oddly careful. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it pulled his attention away from the page. The sound seemed to be coming from the living room window near the kitchen. He listened for a moment and decided it was probably just a branch hitting the glass. The wind outside had grown a little stronger, and he knew trees could scrape against windows when the wind picked up. It was a simple, normal explanation, and he wanted it to be true. He stood up, put his book down, and walked into the living room. He switched on the small lamp by the couch. The soft yellow light spread across the room, making the window glow faintly. He expected to see a loose branch brushing against the glass, but when he looked, there was nothing there. He stepped closer. The yard outside the farmhouse was flat and open. There were no trees close enough for their branches to touch the window. The nearest line of trees stood farther out, forming a dark wall at the edge of the property. No bushes leaned against the siding. The roofline was plain and clean, no loose parts hanging down to scrape the glass. The wind outside sounded low and distant, moving through the trees, but nothing near the house was brushing or bumping against it. Elias stared out into the darkness, frowning. After a long moment with no sound and nothing moving outside, he told himself it must have been some random noise, maybe the wood expanding and contracting in the cold. He turned the lamp off and went back to his chair. A few minutes later, it came again. Tap, 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 tap. This time, his shoulders tightened. He tried to keep reading, forcing his eyes along the lines of text. But every tap dragged his attention back to the window. The sound seemed to stand out more than before, like the rest of the house had gone quieter just so he would hear it. The tapping was even and careful, the way someone might knock if they weren't in a hurry. Eventually, he couldn't pretend anymore. He put the book down again, more sharply this time, and picked up a flashlight from the small table. His heart was beating a little faster now, though he told himself he was being foolish. He walked back into the living room and flicked on the flashlight, shining the beam directly onto the window. Bright light washed over the glass and the yard outside. The beam cut through the darkness and reached all the way to the tree line. The yard was empty. There was no one there, no animals, no movement, no loose branches, no swinging object that could be hitting the glass. As soon as the flashlight beam hit the window, the tapping stopped. Elias stood there, staring out, feeling a bead of sweat slide down the back of his neck. The timing chilled him. The sound continued when the house was dark, but stopped when he shined a light on it. That didn't feel like something random. It felt like a reaction. He turned the flashlight off, but stayed facing the window. He listened. For a while, there was only the sound of his own breathing and the distant whisper of wind. Then, after what felt like a long minute, it started again. Tap, tap, tap. His chest tightened. The sound was not louder than before, but it pressed on his nerves more now that he knew nothing was near the window. Time dragged. The taps came and went, always in that slow, careful rhythm. Minutes turned into an hour, then another. Elias didn't lie down. He didn't even try to. He walked from room to room, turning on every light he could. The farmhouse glowed warm and bright inside, but the darkness outside the windows looked even deeper now in contrast, like a thick black wall pressing against the glass. He kept trying to find explanations. Maybe it was a loose board in the wall that moved when the house shifted. Maybe some piece of metal outside was lightly swinging in the wind, tapping in just the right place. Maybe an animal was climbing somewhere on the siding. He built mental lists of normal reasons, repeating them in his head as if they were a prayer. But every time the tapping started and stopped with the light, those reasons felt weaker and weaker. At some point, his fear turned into anger and stubbornness. He felt trapped in a game he didn't understand, with something he couldn't see taking control of his night. He suddenly knew he couldn't just sit and listen to it anymore. He had to do something. He grabbed the flashlight again. This time, before moving, he walked to the fireplace and picked up the iron poker. It was solid and heavy, cold in his hand. Just holding it made him feel a little less helpless. Then he walked slowly to the front door. His heart hammered in his chest as he reached for the lock. The soft click of the lock turning sounded loud in the quiet house. He opened the door and stepped outside. The night air wrapped around him cold, damp, and smelling strongly of wet earth and pine. The darkness out there felt bigger than he remembered, almost endless. The farmhouse stood like a small island of light in a sea of black trees and empty land. Beyond the glow from the windows, everything faded into shadow. He pointed the flashlight toward the living room window from the outside, sweeping the light along the wall, around the frame, down to the ground, and across the yard. Everything looked completely normal. The siding was bare. The window glass was clean and clear. The dirt and grass near the foundation were undisturbed. No footprints, no tool marks, no dragged object, no figure. The air was still. The wind had died. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No insects. No rustling bushes. No owl or distant animal cry. It felt like the entire area was paused, waiting. Elias walked along the side of the house, his boots crunching lightly on the damp ground. He kept his flashlight beam moving, searching for anything, a loose hanging shutter, a swinging cable, a broken gutter. The light found nothing unusual. He stopped directly below the living room window. He turned off the flashlight, leaving himself in complete darkness, except for the faint glow from inside the house. He stood perfectly still and listened. Silence. Slowly, his breathing began to calm. Standing there, with no tapping, no scraping, nothing at all, he started to feel foolish. Maybe it really had been some strange sound inside the walls. Maybe the wind had kicked something around earlier, and now that the weather had calmed, the sound was gone. Maybe he had let his imagination run wild because of how empty and isolated the place was. He exhaled, a long breath that carried some of his tension with it. The iron poker felt heavy now, and he just wanted to go back inside, lock the door, and sleep. He turned to go. That was when he heard it. It started very softly, so soft he almost didn't notice it. This time, it wasn't a tapping sound. It was different. It was a slow, wet, scraping noise coming from above his head. From the roof, he froze, every muscle suddenly tight again. The scraping sound dragged along slowly, like something damp and solid was being dragged across the shingles. It moved along the line above him, steady and unmistakable. His skin crawled. With shaking hands, he pointed the flashlight upward. The beam climbed the wall and reached the roof line. The light washed over the edge of the roof and tiles. There was nothing there. No animal crouched on the shingles, no loose branch or broken gutter, just the dark shape of the roof against the night sky. But the sound didn't stop. The scraping grew quieter, and then another sound took its place, a low, heavy creaking, like wood being pressed from above. It wasn't the sound of something sliding anymore. It was the sound of weight, as if something large and heavy were slowly pressing down on the structure of the house. Then Elias realized what he was hearing. The noise was coming from inside the roof, not just on top of it, from the attic above the living room. It sounded like something pushing against the attic floorboards, right above the spot where, earlier, the tapping had come from on the window. Right above the place where he had been sitting, reading, thinking that the house was his peaceful retreat. The realization hit him like a wave. The isolation that had felt calming only days before now felt terrifying. Every mile of forest between the farmhouse and the nearest person pressed into his mind. There was no one around to call for help. No neighbors who could hear him, no cell service, no one nearby at all. The farmhouse, once a quiet, safe place, seemed incredibly fragile. A thin box of wood and glass, standing under something he couldn't see and didn't understand. The quiet at Blackwood Manor did not feel like normal quiet either. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a regular home late at night. It felt thick, like the air itself was holding a breath. The silence had weight, as if someone or something had filled the empty space where sound should be. Elias Thorne had never expected to inherit anything from anyone. Most of his family lived ordinary lives with small homes, not huge properties. But then a letter came, and he found himself sitting in a lawyer's office, listening to a will being read. The house he was inheriting belonged to a great-aunt he had never met, a woman people in the nearby town used to call the shut-in. He had barely heard her name before that day. There was one condition attached to the inheritance. If he wanted the full amount of money and everything that came with the property, he had to live in the house for 1 full year. Not visit, not check in. He had to stay there and make it his home for 12 months. Sitting in the office with a cup of coffee in his hand and paperwork in front of him, it sounded like an easy deal. A year in a big house in exchange for a large inheritance? It didn't seem that hard. Elias thought about his overdue architectural thesis and all the work he needed to finish. A quiet, rent-free place to focus sounded almost perfect. He signed without much hesitation. He barely noticed the way the lawyer's eyes flicked away when he said the name of the property, or the way the receptionist's smile briefly faded when she handed him the pen. He told himself they were just superstitious people in a small town, nervous about an old house with a reputation. Blackwood Manor was deep in the Oregon woods too, but not like the simple farmhouse. This was something else. At the end of a long, curving driveway lined with old trees, the house rose up out of the mist like a dark monument. Rain had been falling all afternoon, making the road slick and turning the branches into long, wet fingers hanging overhead. By the time Elias arrived, the sky was already sliding toward night, gray and low. The manor was huge, made mostly of dark stone and wood, with steep gables and tall, narrow windows that seemed too thin for their height. It looked like it belonged in an old photograph, or on the cover of a Gothic novel. Even before he stepped inside, the sight of it made something in his chest tighten. It was impressive, yes, but also unsettling, as if it was watching him approach. Inside, the air felt wrong from the start. It was colder than it should have been, even with all the doors and windows shut. The cold wasn't just on his skin, it sank deeper, into his bones. The manor smelled old, but not in the usual way. There was dust, of course, and the faded hint of dried herbs, lavender, mostly tucked into old bowls and corners. Underneath that, though, he sensed another smell. Faint at first, then stronger as he walked through the hallways. It smelled metallic and sweet, like old coins or rusty water. Something like dried blood. Another layer of smell reminded him of wet leaves beginning to rot. He tried to push those thoughts away, telling himself it was probably just old pipes and years of closed rooms. He spent the first few days exploring, trying to get comfortable with the size of the place. The house had many rooms, narrow hallways, bedrooms with heavy curtains, and long corridors that seemed to stretch just farther than expected. The room he liked most was the library. It was large and lined on all sides with tall bookshelves, filled with leather-bound books that hadn't been touched in a long time. He set up his drafting table near one of the windows and spread out his papers, deciding that would be his study. At first, it was restful. The quiet helped him focus, but slowly, he began to realize that the silence in Blackwood Manor was not empty. It was layered with sounds that didn't belong to him. Sometimes, the wood in the walls and ceiling creaked in ways that sounded almost like voices, far away, too soft to understand, but clear enough that he would pause and listen, wondering if someone else was in the house. The floorboards made soft, sighing sounds even when he stood still, as if footsteps had just moved through and left an echo behind. He would walk through the house, and when he stopped, he often thought he heard something shift in another room, just after he had passed. In the front hall stood a tall grandfather clock with a dark wooden case. Its hands were stuck at 3:17. It didn't tick, it didn't chime, it just stood there like a dead weight in the foyer. Curious, Elias checked it more than once, but the hands never moved. Still, every now and then, even when he was in another room, he was sure he heard one lonely tick echo from the hall. Just one, never two. When he checked again, the clock face always showed the same frozen time. Small things moved around the house in quiet, unsettling ways. Doors he knew he had closed were sometimes slightly open the next time he walked by. A hairbrush he left on the bathroom counter appeared on the edge of the sink instead. A stack of papers he thought he had left neatly arranged was just a little out of order. In his bedroom, a small hand mirror sat on the mantel above the fireplace. At first, it sat in the center, its silver surface dark from age. After a few days, he noticed something odd. Each time he left the room and returned, the mirror seemed to be a bit closer to the edge of the mantel than before. Not enough to fall, just enough to make it obvious that it was not where he had left it. He tested this. He moved the mirror back to the middle, stared at it, and left the room for a while. When he came back, it had shifted again, only by an inch or so. It never moved while he watched, only when he left. As the days went by, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor grew heavier. Elias started to keep lights on in every room he used, even during the day. The shadows in the corners seemed too deep. At night, when he turned off the lamps, the darkness felt thick and close, resting just beyond the reach of his hands. Sometimes, when he woke up suddenly in the early hours, he had the strong feeling that something had just moved out of his line of sight, blending back into the dark. The metallic, sweet smell got stronger too. It clung to his clothes, settled in the sheets, and lingered in the air no matter how many windows he opened. There was no clear source. It was just part of the house now, like it had seeped into the walls. Then came the night when everything changed. Elias lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The house was unusually quiet, even for Blackwood Manor. The wind outside had dropped, the trees were still, the silence pressed against him. Then, faintly, he heard a sound coming from upstairs. It was a child's voice. At first, it was so soft he wasn't sure if he was really hearing it. It sounded like someone singing a small, thin voice, humming a lullaby or a simple song. The sound came from above him, somewhere on the upper floor, possibly from the direction of the old nursery he had seen earlier in the week. As he listened, the song became clearer. It was definitely a child's voice, but something about it was wrong. The melody wobbled, drifting off key. The rhythm slowed in odd places, then sped up again. It sounded like whoever was singing didn't fully know the tune, or was copying it from someone who didn't sing it quite right either. Some notes dragged out too long, some stopped too short. The effect was unsettling and unnatural. Every muscle in Elias's body tensed. His eyes went wide. He was alone in the house. There were no children anywhere nearby. The manor sat on acres of forested land. The nearest road was far away. There was no reason, none at all, for a child to be singing upstairs in the middle of the night. He held his breath and kept listening. The song continued, soft and eerie, floating down through the floorboards from above. The uneven notes crawled under his skin. It sounded like the singer was moving slightly as they sang, maybe pacing slowly around a room. Then he heard another sound. It came from the wall right behind his bed. A faint scratching. It sounded like something with small, sharp tips, nails, claws, or something similar slowly dragging down the inside of the wall. The scratching was not loud, but it was steady. It moved in a single, slow line, then started again from higher up, repeating the same path. It felt like whatever was making the sound was just inches away from his head, separated from him only by wood and plaster. The singing continued upstairs. The scratching continued behind him. Elias lay there, frozen, staring at the darkness of his ceiling, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. The house he had once thought of as an easy place to spend a year felt suddenly like a trap. The old inheritance, the conditions in the will, the strange reactions of the people in town, all of it gained a new weight in his mind. Blackwood Manor wasn't just old and creaky. It wasn't just isolated or eerie. It was awake. And whatever lived inside its walls and floors was not interested in letting him forget it. If you're still here listening, and these stories are keeping you company while you drift off, take a second to like the video and subscribe to True Nightmares. So there's always another long, creepy episode waiting for your next sleepless night. The 16th of July, 2022. 3 summers ago. That date feels burned into my mind now, like it's stamped there permanently. At the time, it started out as just another slow, boring summer night. A group of us were at a friend's house for a small get-together. Music played in the background, people talked in small groups, and phones glowed in almost every hand. But underneath all of that, there was a restless feeling. Nobody knew what to do next. We were just sitting around, slowly getting more bored as the night went on. That was when I suggested the thing I now wish I had kept to myself. It was around 12:20 a.m. The party energy had faded, but none of us were ready to call it a night. Summer nights always feel longer somehow, like they stretch on forever if you give them a reason to. I casually suggested we take our bikes out to the old hiking and biking trail nearby. It was something we used to do all the time. Night rides had always felt exciting and a little reckless, like we were claiming the dark for ourselves. That trail also had haunted stories attached to it. The kind of local rumors everyone knows, people seeing things in the trees, weird noises, that sort of thing. We had heard them all before. We never took them seriously. We had ridden that same trail at night easily 100 times and never experienced anything more than a flat tire or a scraped knee. To us, the stories were just that, stories. Nothing real, nothing dangerous. I didn't even think to mention them when I brought up the idea. We just grabbed our bikes and decided to go. We drove to the trailhead and got there around 1:45 a.m. The world looks different at that hour. The road was empty. The sky was black and without a moon. The air felt heavy and very still, like the entire area had gone quiet just to see what we would do. When we stepped out of the car and started unloading the bikes, the main sound was the crunch of gravel under our shoes and tires. There were no other cars in the lot, no wind through the trees, no insects buzzing loud enough to notice. It was just us, our bikes, and the silence. We chose to start with the easy trail, a route we knew well. It had been about 2 years since our last ride there, and we didn't want to jump straight into anything too intense. The path was familiar, turns we recognized, tree roots we remembered, little dips and rises we had joked about before. Our bike lights cut thin beams through the darkness, lighting only a narrow slice of the world ahead. For a while, it felt like old times. We laughed, rode close together, and called out to each other in the dark. Then we reached the part everyone knew, Dead Man's Hill. Dead Man's Hill was a steep, long climb that had earned its dramatic name from how often we crashed or wiped out on it. No one had literally died there, but plenty of our pride had. It was the kind of hill that left your legs burning and your lungs feeling like they were on fire. We used to joke about how many times we had died trying to make it up or down. Wipeouts, falls, sliding sideways, it happened constantly. Taking on that hill was our unofficial test of who was the strongest rider. We started up the hill together, pushing hard on the pedals. The climb was just as awful as we remembered. Our chains clacked, our bikes creaked, and every breath became shorter and harsher. I focused on the top of the slope, pushing myself one pedal at a time, trying to beat the others to the peak. Somehow, I did. I reached the top first. I rolled forward a few feet, then braked and stopped. The moment my bike came to a halt, everything around me changed. The temperature dropped, not a little. Not the normal cool breeze you feel when sweat evaporates. It was like someone had suddenly opened a door to a freezer right in front of me. The cold wrapped around me, sinking straight into my skin and bones. Every hair on my arms and neck stood up. My fingers tightened on the handlebars. I didn't move. It felt like I couldn't. I just sat there on my bike, staring out toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the hill. Behind me, I heard one of my friends call my name and ask why I'd stopped. His voice sounded weirdly distant, like he was shouting at me from much farther away than he really was. I heard him clearly, but my mouth wouldn't work. My throat felt locked, like it had forgotten how to speak. All I could do was raise my hand and point. At first, I didn't even fully understand what I was pointing at. It felt like my body reacted before my mind caught up. There, standing at the edge of the tree line, was a figure. It had the shape of a person, but it did not look human. It was tall, somewhere around 6 to 8 feet in height, and extremely thin. It stood perfectly still, facing us. But the way it looked was the worst part. It wasn't just a dark figure. It was pure blackness, like a cutout in the world, a hole where light simply didn't exist. No reflections from our bike lights, no shine, no visible texture, no clothing, no hair, no face. Just a pitch-black human-shaped silhouette standing at the edge of the trees. It did not sway. It did not shift its weight. It did not breathe in any visible way. Even when people stand very still, they still move a tiny bit, because bodies are never completely motionless. This thing did not move at all. It looked almost flat, as if it had been painted onto the darkness. Before I could process anything or turn my bike around, something spoke. But it didn't speak out loud. There was no sound in the air, no voice I could hear with my ears. Instead, the words appeared directly inside my head, like a thought that didn't belong to me. "What is your name?" The question rang through my mind in a voice that felt wrong in every possible way. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like a mixture of broken glass, distant screams, and static dragged together into something that barely formed words. It was deep and rough and full of distortion, scraping against my thoughts as it echoed inside my skull. In that second, my whole body locked up. One moment I was breathing, gripping the handlebars, and pointing. The next, I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, my fingers, everything froze. I couldn't turn my head, blink, or even fully inhale. My lungs managed only shallow, uneven breaths, like something heavy was pressing down on my chest. My jaw clenched against my will. Panic exploded in my mind, but it felt distant from my body, like I was trapped behind glass inside myself. My friend reached the top of the hill behind me and saw me sitting there, completely frozen, arm still raised and pointing at the tree line. Then he saw what I was pointing at. Whatever was standing there, whatever was staring at us from the edge of the forest, he saw enough of it to know something was wrong. Very wrong. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to talk to it. He didn't try to be brave. He turned his bike around and launched himself back down Dead Man's Hill as fast as he could. I heard the skid of his tires, the rattle of rocks spraying out from under his wheels, and then he disappeared into the darkness at the bottom of the hill. 1 second he was there behind me. The next second, he was gone. The moment he vanished from my sight, the paralysis snapped. It was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly my lungs drew in a full breath. My arms and legs came back under my control. Pins and needles, sensations rushed through my limbs. My heart hammered violently in my chest. My whole body shook with the sudden return of movement. My voice finally broke free too, but it came out rough and strangled, like something had scraped it on the way out. "Guys, we need to leave right now. There's something out there." The words burst out of me without planning. My voice sounded cracked and uneven, full of panic. I didn't care how it sounded. Every cell in my body screamed that we needed to get off that hill and away from that thing. My other friends, who were still making their way up or hanging back on the easier part of the trail, hadn't seen what I saw as clearly. Some of them couldn't see the tree line from where they were. To them, I probably seemed overdramatic, breathing hard, yelling, telling them we had to go. They hadn't felt the sudden cold or heard the grinding voice inside their head. They asked what I had seen. They tried to calm me down and laugh it off. Nothing else major happened that night, at least not to them. We eventually left, rode back down, and drove home. But leaving the trail didn't make the fear leave me. The image of that tall, solid black shape stayed in my mind, the cold that seemed to seep straight into my bones. That question, "What is your name?" echoed in my head for weeks. No matter how much time passed, the memory stayed sharp and clear, like it refused to fade. 3 years went by. I tried to push that night into the background of my life. I went on with school, work, and normal routines. Sometimes I thought about that night on Dead Man's Hill at Cathedral Hills in Oregon, but I forced myself to treat it as a strange, one-time event I couldn't explain. I told myself I might have been exhausted or overly freaked out by the dark. Maybe my mind had filled in the gaps. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I remembered. Then, about a week ago, something happened that tore that illusion apart. I went back to that same friend's house, the one who had turned and bolted down the hill that night. We hadn't hung out there in a while, but I decided to stay over for the night. It was meant to be an ordinary visit. Play games, talk, relax, maybe fall asleep late in front of a movie. The second I stepped inside, something felt off. Nothing obvious was wrong. The lights were on. The house looked normal. His family moved around like they always had, but the atmosphere felt different. The air felt thick and heavy, like the feeling you get right before a big storm, when the world gets oddly still and tense. There was a weight in the rooms that I couldn't explain. My nerves reacted immediately. My skin prickled. My chest felt tight for no clear reason. I asked my friend if anything weird had happened at the house recently, or if something had changed. He laughed and told me I was being paranoid. He said I just wasn't used to staying over anymore, that I was probably thinking too much about old stories. I tried to accept that. I didn't want to drag up what happened on the hill and scare myself over nothing. We stayed up late, talking and messing around on our phones. We played games, watched videos, and let the hours slide by. Eventually, everyone settled down to sleep. I lay down on the bed or couch they gave me and stared at the ceiling for a while. That strange, heavy feeling still sitting in the back of my mind. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up at exactly 3:20 a.m. It wasn't a slow wake-up. I didn't just toss and turn and then open my eyes. It was sudden, sharp, like something had grabbed me out of sleep and pulled me up. My eyes snapped open. The room was dim and quiet. The first thing I felt was not confusion. It was the sensation of being watched. Not in the general, anxious way. It felt like something real and specific was staring straight at me. My heart started pounding. The air felt heavier, harder to pull into my lungs. My muscles went tense. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. It was there. Outside on the lawn, framed by the darkness, stood the same black figure I had seen 3 summers before on Dead Man's Hill. The same height, the same unnatural stillness, the same total, light-eating blackness where a person should have been. No face, no features, just a tall, human-shaped void. Even though it had no visible eyes, I knew it was looking directly at me. Its attention felt like a physical weight pressing into my chest, like someone pushing down on me with both hands. I could hardly breathe. The pressure increased the longer I looked at it. Then it moved. The movement was slow and smooth, too controlled, like something that had studied how to move rather than being born to it. It raised one arm and reached toward the window. My brain immediately shouted that this was impossible. The window was shut. The glass was between us. The frame was locked. But it didn't matter. The window slid open. I heard the soft sound of it moving in its frame, but it sounded far away and unreal, like it was happening in a dream. A rush of cold air flooded into the room, bringing with it that same ancient, wrong feeling I remembered from the hill. Every part of me screamed to move, to yell, to grab my friend and shake him awake. My body didn't listen. Just like before, paralysis took hold. My arms, legs, and throat locked. My mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a faint wheeze. My tongue and lips tried to form words, but my voice refused to work. My eyes stayed open and fixed on the window. I could not look away. The figure stood there, partly outside, partly inside the room's space, as if the open window was enough of an invitation. Its presence filled the room, making the small space feel even smaller. The cold cut into my skin. I tried desperately to move any part of me. I tried to kick. I tried to shove the bed. I tried to bump into my friend sleeping nearby. I wanted to wake him up more than anything, to prove I wasn't alone in this. My body twitched and jerked, but he didn't move. He slept through everything, completely still. It felt like something was keeping him from waking up. The fear climbed higher and higher, until it felt like my mind would snap from the strain. Somehow, maybe from sheer panic or some random break in whatever held me, I managed to pull free of the paralysis. It wasn't smooth. It felt like tearing myself through thick mud. But suddenly I could move again. I ran. I bolted from the room as fast as I could, almost tripping over my own feet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rushed down the hallway and into his parents' room, shaking them awake, my words stumbling over each other. They could hear how terrified I was. They got up immediately and came back with me toward the room I had just left. When we got there, it was still standing at the window. The figure had not left. It remained there, framed by the open window, facing into the room. The air felt icy. It tilted its head slightly to one side, a slow, unnatural motion that made it seem even more aware, more curious, more focused on us. Then I heard the voice again. It didn't come from the air or from a mouth. It came straight into my mind, the same grinding, distorted sound I remembered from before. Only this time, the words were clearer. That somehow made it worse. You can run, but not hide. The sentence echoed through my head, each word rolling around like stones grinding together. I could feel it sinking into my thoughts, planting itself there. My friend's parents saw it too, and I watched the realization spread across their faces. This was not in my imagination. They were staring at it with their own eyes. This was real. Before anyone could get close to the window, before they could try to shut it or confront it, the figure moved again. It didn't climb down. It didn't stumble. It didn't make a sound of landing. It simply let itself fall backward out of the window with a smooth motion and disappeared from view. We ran outside. The night air hit us, cold and sharp. We looked up at the window, then around the yard, expecting to see a tall shape standing on the grass or retreating toward the trees. Instead, we saw it near the lake, beside their house. It moved quickly, crossing the ground with long, silent strides. Then, without breaking stride, it stepped into the dark water and sank out of sight. There was no splash, no wave, no disturbance like a normal person or animal would make. It just slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by the lake as if it had always belonged there. We stood there, stunned and shaking, staring at the calm water. None of us spoke for a long moment. There was nothing normal left to say. The next day, my mind was in overdrive. I couldn't just push this away again. I went online and started searching everything I could think of. Tall black figures, shadow beings, entities that speak in your head, things that follow you from one place to another. I read stories about shadow people, about creatures that mimic voices, about different legends from around the world. Some people talked about beings called skinwalkers. Some details sounded similar: tall shapes, strange movement, following people to their homes, but other parts didn't quite fit. I still don't know exactly what this thing is. Maybe it's a skinwalker. Maybe it's something related, or something else entirely. I live in Oregon. The place where this all started is Cathedral Hills. I don't know if the land there has a history, or if that trail was just the first time it noticed me. What I do know is this. It appeared once on Dead Man's Hill, on a quiet, moonless night when we thought we were just out for a ride. 3 years later, it showed up again, this time, at my friend's house, staring in through a window at 3:20 inches the morning. It remembered me. If anything else happens, if it shows up again, I'll have more to tell. For now, all I can say for sure is that whatever that tall black figure is, it's real, and it isn't finished with me yet. That Friday afternoon, after work, I decided to go visit my father at his summer trailer at Stafford Valley Country Club in Connecticut. The place is quiet, calm, and tucked away lots of trees, open space, and older folks who just want to relax. It's the kind of place people go when they're tired of drama, traffic, and city noise, and just want peace for a while. When I got there, everything went the way it usually did. We joked around for a bit, ordered some food, and later that night we watched Bill Maher on HBO around 10 p.m. After the show ended, we both agreed it was time for bed. I was worn out from work, and my dad, 75 years old at the time, needed his rest. I slept on the lounge couch in the main living area, and he went off to his bedroom at the back of the trailer. Around 12:45 a.m., I woke up feeling miserable and overheated. That's always been my father's thing. He is always cold. Even in warm weather, he likes to turn the heat way up. He'll sometimes set the thermostat crazy high in 80-degree weather, just to feel comfortable. He does it because of his age and health. His body doesn't hold heat well. He's still like that today. I looked over at the thermostat, then at the small outside thermometer my dad kept on the kitchen window. It said the outside temperature was in the 60 seconds. When I stepped outside to check for myself, the night air felt perfect cool, fresh, easy to breathe. Inside, though, it felt like being trapped in a hot box. The air was thick and suffocating. I knew there was no way I was going back to sleep until I cooled down. I went back in and turned off the thermostat. My dad was wrapped up in his blankets, and he's a very heavy sleeper, so I doubted he would notice right away. Then I grabbed my car keys, stepped outside again, and headed for my car. I climbed in, started the engine, and cranked the air conditioning as high as it would go. The cold air blasted out, and it felt amazing, like stepping into a refrigerator. I leaned back in the seat and finally felt some relief. It always drives me crazy when my dad cranks the heat up when it's already warm, and these days I usually just leave if he does it for too long. That night, I just wanted to cool off and calm down. After a few minutes of just sitting there with the AC running, I got an idea. It had been a long time since I'd gone for a night drive. Something about the quiet darkness around the country club, the empty roads, made it feel like the right time to take a short ride and clear my head. I figured I could drive a little, then come back and sleep once the trailer cooled down. I left the country club and took the back way out the route I usually use to come and go. That road goes through the more wooded part of Somers, Connecticut. It's not a long drive, but during the day it's a really nice one. Trees on both sides, rolling hills, stretches of open land between patches of woods. At night, I thought it would be interesting to see it again after such a long time. I drove until I reached a spot called the Apple Place, a small restaurant I knew well. Of course, at that hour, it was closed and dark, just a quiet building beside the road. I had already planned to use it as my turnaround point before I even left the club. My idea was simple: drive there, turn around, head back. So I turned the car around and started back toward my dad's trailer. At first, everything looked ordinary. The road was empty. The woods along both sides were thick and dark, forming long walls of trees. My headlights cut twin beams out in front of me, lighting up the pavement, the white lines, the edges of the road. It felt quiet and normal. Then I reached a small rise in the road, a modest hill. On the passenger side edge of the road, there was a drainage ditch, a shallow dip meant to carry water away from the pavement. Past that ditch, the woods grew right up close again. I drove up over the little hill, and as I came down the other side, my headlights swept across the road and showed me something strange on the right edge. I saw dark footprints. They appeared clearly on the dry asphalt along the side of the road. That alone confused me. It wasn't raining, the pavement was dry, and yet there were fresh-looking footprints, dark patches, shaped like bare feet leading along the edge. I only had a second to register that before my headlights lit up more of the road ahead. A short distance farther, the beam of my headlights fell on the shape of someone walking along the side of the road. It was about 30 inches the morning. I eased off the gas and let the car slow down, letting the headlights shine more directly on the figure. Whoever it was walking on the shoulder, with no flashlight, no reflective clothing, nothing visible to alert drivers, just slowly walking along the road at that late hour. I decided to bring the car to a full stop, not just to avoid hitting them, but also to get a better look and understand what I was seeing. Under the full light of my headlights, details came into focus. It was a woman, judging by her body shape and build. She wore what looked like a white nightgown, but it was in terrible condition. The fabric was shredded in several places and stained gray, like it had been dragged through mud and water repeatedly. The gown was torn up past her mid-thighs, leaving most of her legs exposed. The sleeves were gone. Both sides were ripped so badly that her arms and shoulders were bare. Her hair hung down in long black strands, reaching below her waist. It looked thick and completely unkempt, matted, tangled, and heavy, like it hadn't seen a brush or shampoo in a very long time. As I watched her, I realized she was very tall. Even with her body slightly hunched forward as she walked, she looked around 6 feet tall, maybe more. She walked with a slow, steady pace, her neck and head drooping forward, her hair falling over her face. Then my eyes slid down to her feet, and my confusion turned into something closer to fear. From the middle of her calves down to the soles of her feet, her skin was covered in a dark, thick, shiny substance. It stuck to her legs like black oil or tar. Under my headlights, it glistened slightly, slick and heavy. That explained the dark footprints I had seen on the dry road. She was leaving tracks made of this strange black sludge, but nothing around us suggested where it came from. There were no puddles, no nearby streams overflowing onto the road, no mud patches, just dry pavement and forest. The substance shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't have been covered in it at all. Her skin, where I could see it clearly, was extremely pale. Not just light. It had that cold, bloodless look you see on people who are very ill or very cold. On the backs of her hands, her fingers looked slightly blue at the tips. Blue fingers usually mean poor circulation, frostbite, or extreme cold. But this was early autumn. The night was cool, but not freezing. It was nowhere near cold enough to explain that. Something about her appearance felt wrong in a way I couldn't easily brush off. She kept walking slowly forward as I sat there. Her head hung low, her neck bent so far that I couldn't see her face. She swayed slightly from side to side with each step, but there was no reaction at all to the bright car headlights shining directly on her. That was odd in itself. Most people, even if they're tired or distracted, will at least turn their head toward a bright light or throw up a hand to shield their eyes. She did neither. I tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe she was on drugs. Maybe she was mentally ill, lost in her own world, wandering around without noticing anything. Maybe she was homeless and had been sleeping outside, had gotten into something weird like oil or waste from a nearby area I didn't know about. Those possibilities crossed my mind, but the black sludge on her legs and the way she moved didn't fully match any of them. Despite the unease rising in my chest, one thought kept punching through. I didn't feel right just driving past her and leaving her there. Whatever her deal was, she looked alone and vulnerable, barefoot, poorly dressed, walking on a dark road in the middle of the night. If she really was high, sick, or in trouble, just ignoring her felt wrong. It didn't sit well with me to pretend I hadn't seen her. So I made a choice. I slowly drove past her, moved about 15 feet ahead, and brought the car to a stop. I left my headlights on high, so the area behind me was brightly lit. My plan was to get out, go back a few steps, and talk to her. Maybe offer to call someone or give her a ride to somewhere safe, police, hospital, somewhere. Before I opened the door though, I glanced at the rearview mirror to check on her. What I saw frozen there made every part of me go cold. She had stopped walking. She wasn't moving at all. She stood perfectly still in the middle of the lane behind my car, her body straight and motionless. Her long black hair still hung over her face and shoulders, hiding most of her features. I stared at her reflection in the mirror and then noticed something even worse. She was raising her head. The movement was slow and deliberate. Her hair shifted slightly as her head lifted. The thick strands still covered most of her face, but as she tilted her head fully up, more of her left side became visible. Little by little, the hair parted just enough for me to see part of her face. I saw her left cheek, pale and smooth. I saw part of her jaw. Then I saw her left eye. It was completely black. Not just a large pupil, not just dark brown. The entire visible part of the eye where the white and iris should have been looked like a single black orb, glossy and depthless. The sight of that eye locked onto the mirror made my whole body seize. I couldn't move. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt, but I couldn't loosen my grip. My arms felt locked. My legs wouldn't respond. My throat clenched so hard that I couldn't even swallow, much less talk or scream. She stared straight at me through the mirror with that one black eye, and I had the horrible sensation that she wasn't just looking at my reflection. It felt like she was looking through it, directly at me, like she could see straight into my mind and thoughts. I don't know how long we stayed like that, both of us frozen in place, me sitting in the driver's seat and her standing on the road behind my car. It felt like time stretched out unnaturally, like the night had stopped moving. Then she began to walk toward me. Each step was slow and controlled. She didn't stumble. She didn't limp. She moved like someone walking down a grocery aisle, calm and unhurried. 12 feet away, 10 feet, 8 feet, closer with every step. My fear grew stronger with each one, but my body still refused to move. I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look at her directly over the back seat. I could only watch her in the rearview mirror and feel my chest get tighter. When she was about 5 feet from the back of my car, she stopped again. Then she did something that made everything feel even worse. She leaned her head slightly forward. then tilted it slowly to her right, like a curious dog hearing a strange sound, or someone pretending to act cute and playful. The angle of the tilt was odd, almost exaggerated. As her head moved, her hair shifted again, and more of her face showed beneath it. That's when I saw her mouth. She was smiling. It wasn't a huge grin. It was a small, closed-lipped smile, soft and almost gentle. In any other context, it might have been a normal, even friendly expression. But in that moment, on that face, with that black eye above it, it was one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen. Her head stayed tilted. Her shoulders were slightly hunched forward. That small smile remained in place, frozen. Her black eye stayed locked on mine in the mirror. The combination made her look like something trying to mimic human behavior, but not understanding why humans did it in the first place. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. My breathing was shallow and fast. Sweat rolled down my back even though the air in the car felt cold. For a few long seconds, my mind was empty, like terror had knocked all other thoughts out. Then something inside me finally broke that mental freeze. It was like a survival switch flipped suddenly back on. My hands loosened just enough to move. My foot, which had been frozen on the brake pedal, suddenly felt like it belonged to me again. My whole body started shaking violently with the adrenaline, but I could move. Without thinking any more about it, I pulled my foot off the brake and slammed it onto the gas pedal as hard as I could. The engine roared, and the car jumped forward. I kept my eyes mostly on the road, but I couldn't help glancing at the rearview mirror as I sped away. She was no longer leaning forward or tilting her head. She was standing straight again, hair hanging down in front of her face, covering everything. Her body was completely still, arms at her sides, as my car tore down the road away from her. There was no sign of her trying to chase after me, no sudden lunge, no movement at all. Within seconds, the night swallowed her, and she vanished from the beam of my headlights and my mirror. I didn't slow down again until I was almost back near the entrance to the country club. When I pulled up next to my father's trailer, it was close to 2 a.m. I parked, turned off the engine, got out quickly, and hurried inside. Somehow, I managed not to wake my father or his dog. I walked straight to the lounge couch and sat down heavily, staring at my hands. They were still shaking badly. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. My voice sounded weak and thin, almost like it wasn't mine. I tried to replay what I'd seen in my mind, but it felt unreal, like something pulled from a nightmare. Part of me wanted to believe I had fallen asleep in the car and dreamed it all, but another part knew I had been wide awake the entire time. Whatever that woman or thing was, it did not feel human. Deep inside, I knew that. I must have sat there for an hour, slowly calming down, though the fear stayed. Finally, exhaustion hit me so hard that I passed out on the couch, sitting upright, without even lying down properly. The next morning, my dad got up around 10 a.m. I heard him moving around and forced myself to wake up. He came into the main area, looked at me, and asked, "Sleep good?" "Yeah," I said, "Fine." It was a lie. I didn't want to tell him what happened. I didn't think he would believe me, and I didn't even know how to explain it in a way that made sense. It was easier to pretend everything was normal. The morning went as usual after that. I took a shower, tried to shake off the leftover unease, and had a simple lunch with my father. We talked about everyday things. He had no idea that anything strange had happened while he slept. Eventually, I decided it was time for me to head home. I said goodbye, grabbed my things, and went out to my car. When I got in and started the engine, I glanced at the fuel gauge and felt a fresh wave of dread. The tank was noticeably lower than it had been when I arrived the day before. That small detail told me everything I needed to know. I really had driven out that night. I really had burned gas. I really had taken that route and stopped in that spot. It hadn't been some vivid dream in a hot trailer. It had been real. On my way out of the country club area, when I approached the same stretch of road and the small hill where I had first seen the footprints and the woman, I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. My heart rate picked up. I pressed the gas pedal a little harder than usual, wanting to move past it quickly. As I drove over the hill, I let my eyes flick to the side for a second, where the footprints had been the night before. There was nothing there. No dark marks on the pavement, no trail of black sludge, no torn fabric, just clean, dry asphalt and the same quiet woods. It was as if nothing had ever happened. It's been 3 years since that night. I've driven up and down that road many times since then, visiting my father at his trailer, going back and forth like normal. I've never seen her again. No tall woman in a shredded nightgown. No black, shining sludge on the road. No single, solid black eye staring back at me. Just regular drives, calm summers, uneventful trips. I hope that's all the future holds when I visit him again, just simple, peaceful days and nights in the summer of 2026 and beyond. Those 2 nights, the one with the woman on the road and another experience I had, are still the most intense, unexplainable things that have happened to me. I've had smaller, strange moments before and since, but nothing that slammed into me as hard as those. Life is long, though. Anything can happen. Knowing my luck, there's always a chance I'll run into something else one day that I can't explain when I least expect it. Around early summer of 2016, all the way into the very start of fall, in my hometown of Westfield, Massachusetts, I had 3 separate encounters with creatures that I still have a hard time believing I really saw. Those months are stamped in my memory now. I wasn't looking for anything strange back then. I was just living my normal life, taking walks, working, and enjoying the warm evenings. Whatever those things were, they decided to show themselves on their own time, not mine. It all began one early evening when I decided to walk down to the pond near my house. About a 5-minute walk down my street, there's a sportsman's club. It's a nice place even now, but back in 2016 it felt a bit nicer, maybe because there were fewer people around and everything seemed calmer. The club sits near some woods and open fields, with a pond nearby. It's one of those local spots where people fish, shoot at the ranges, and just enjoy being outside in nature. For me, it was always a good place to clear my head and get a break from everyday stress. One Sunday, around early dusk, I decided to take a stroll down there. I just wanted to enjoy the calm evening and the cooler air after a warm day. The sun was starting to sink lower, but there was still enough light to see comfortably. The sky had that soft, glowing look it gets before full darkness starts to settle in. I left my house, walked down the street, and reached the club gate. From there, the road splits in 2. If you go left, the road heads up toward an open field surrounded by thick woods. Farther up in that direction are some archery ranges, and, beyond those, a gun range near an old main clubhouse. If you go right instead, the dirt path leads into a smaller wooded area with a medium-sized fishing pond in the center. It's not a huge pond, but it's a quiet one. That evening, my first instinct was to head toward the pond. I walked that way and reached the bank, but when I got there, something up the hill caught my eye. Through the trees, higher up near the clubhouse, the sunset was glowing. The way the light was shining through the trees made it look like the view would be amazing from up there. So I changed my mind. I turned away from the pond and started walking up the hill toward the clubhouse instead. The walk was peaceful. I could hear birds calling from the trees and crickets starting to chirp, the sounds blending into that familiar evening hum. A few cars were parked farther up near the gun range and clubhouse. I assumed it was just some of the older members hanging around, maybe having a meeting or a drink together. Nothing felt strange. It was just a calm, quiet evening. I kept walking until I reached the area near the mailbox for the main clubhouse. About 20 feet from that mailbox, there's a clear cut of land where the power lines run. The trees are cleared there, and you can see the sky very well. It's a good spot to watch sunsets. The view is actually even better if you walk into the field off to the side. But that day, I didn't feel like going into the tall grass. Standing near the power lines felt like enough. I stood there for about 5 minutes watching the sky. The sun slowly dipped lower, the colors changing from bright gold to deeper orange and soft pink. The light faded just a little more with each passing minute. Everything around me took on that dim, muted look that comes just before real night falls. After a while, I decided it was time to head back. It was late dusk, and I didn't really want to be up there once it got truly dark. I turned around and started walking back the same way I had come. Along that route, there's a corner where a small white building stands. It's a second, smaller clubhouse, mainly used for the nearby archery ranges. Just past that little building, closer to the bend in the road, there are 2 narrow paths going into the woods. The path on the left goes down into a more heavily wooded area. The path on the right leads to a small archery target area that sits a bit deeper in among the trees. I had just walked past the small archery clubhouse when I heard something ahead and to my right rustling leaves and sticks snapping. The sound came from the direction of the right-hand path, where the archery targets are set up. I slowed down without even thinking about it and turned my head to look. That's when I saw it. A pale, white-gray creature came rushing out from that right-hand path in a strange, low run that reminded me of a dog or some other four-legged animal. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in a normal way. I thought it might be a coyote or a fox with mange or a bad skin condition. It moved on all fours, close to the ground, and the shape of its body at a quick glance could fit that kind of animal. Then it stopped. It turned its head and looked straight at me. For what felt like at least 30 seconds, maybe a bit more, we just stared at each other. It was only about 30 feet away, close enough that I could see details clearly. And in that moment, I realized that it was not a fox, not a coyote, and not any animal I recognized. It was strangely human-like. The creature's skin was light grayish pale and totally hairless. The skin had a faint, sickly shine to it, almost like damp clay. It looked thin, but not like something starving or about to die. It was more like it was designed to be that lean, with long, narrow limbs and a tight, almost wiry frame. In its crouched, squatting position, it stood around 4 feet tall. But what really stood out were its arms. They were unusually long for its body size, hanging down close to where knees would be on a human. I didn't see any genitals, nothing that would tell me whether it was male or female. Its body was smooth and plain in that area. My eyes were quickly drawn to its hands, and that's when the fear really started to sink in. Its hands looked disturbingly human in shape. Each hand had 5 long, thin fingers, but at the tips of those fingers were dark claws, 5 on each hand. They were long, narrow, and slightly curved inward, almost like talons. They didn't look like dirty fingernails. They looked like something made for cutting or gripping sharp and dangerous. They reminded me of exposed bone that had been stained dark. It wasn't hard to imagine those claws ripping through flesh or bark or anything else they were raked against. Then I looked at its face. I will never forget that face. The creature's head was completely bald. No hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes that I could see. Its skin was smooth and pale. Where a mouth should have been, there was only a very thin horizontal line. It didn't look like it opened much, if at all. The nose was barely there, a small rise with 2 dark slits instead of a proper nose. It was the eyes that locked me in place. The eyes sat deep in sunken sockets. They were smaller than human eyes, but very clear and very focused. They were pure black, not just dark brown or very dark gray, but solid black, like polished stone. In the dim light of the fading sun, the surface of them caught just enough light to reflect a faint shine, almost like a yellowish glint across the black. They didn't look like empty pits. They looked like solid, glassy, black orbs. There was something behind those eyes. They didn't look like the eyes of a simple animal. There was intelligence there, curiosity, maybe even caution. I had the strong impression that it was studying me just as much as I was studying it. For a moment, it felt like we were both equally shocked to see each other. Time seemed to stretch. My heart thudded against my ribs, and my legs felt stiff, almost locked. I didn't move. It stayed in its low crouch, chest rising and falling slightly as it breathed, but otherwise completely still. Finally, the creature looked away. It flicked its gaze toward the more heavily forested path on the left, then back at me for a few more seconds, as if it were thinking about something. Then, it turned and ran toward that left path, dropping fully onto all fours and sprinting at a speed that surprised me. As it ran, I got a good look at its legs. They bent somewhat like the back legs of a dog, with a clear angle at what would be the knee and ankle, but the feet at the end were wrong. Instead of paws, the feet ended in 5 long, blackened toes. They were claw-like as well, thin and too long, almost like stretched-out human toes with talons at the ends. The motion of those feet looked unnatural and off. The creature disappeared into the trees. I could still hear it for a little while, light crashes through brush, ferns rustling, sticks snapping. Then, suddenly, those sounds stopped completely. The silence that followed didn't feel normal. It felt intentional, like it had stopped on purpose. Even though I couldn't see it anymore, I had a powerful sense that it was still there, hiding just out of sight. It felt like it was watching me from behind the trees or bushes, maybe only a few yards away, hidden by shadows. The sky was getting darker by the minute. Soon it would be full night. I decided I wasn't going to stand around any longer near that spot. I started to back away. I walked backward down the road, keeping my eyes on the place where the creature had vanished. I didn't turn my back on that section of forest once. I did that for almost half a mile, slowly putting distance between myself and the paths until I finally reached the club gate. Only once I stepped under the gate and into the area, lit by street lamps, did I let myself breathe more normally. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I walked fast the rest of the way home, glancing back over my shoulder more than once. About a month later, in the middle of summer, I had my second encounter. This time, I had a witness with me, even if that witness was a cat. At the time, I had a domestic long-haired cat named Guinness. He wasn't fat, just solid and sturdy. Under all that fur, he was strong and muscular. His coat was a mixture of buff white and light brown patches. He had an impressive mane of fur around his neck, which is why we often called him Handsome Lion. He seemed to know he was good-looking too. Whenever someone complimented him, he would soak in the attention with that smug pride only cats can pull off. Guinness was very attached to me. I used to joke that he was my brother with fur, and honestly, that's how it felt. I loved him like family, and he treated me like his person. We used to roughhouse a bit light batting, gentle wrestling, and then go back to normal like nothing happened. He was mostly an indoor cat, but he liked to follow me outside now and then. He never went far. He stayed close, keeping an eye on me while I kept an eye on him. In 2020, not long after he turned 20 years old, very old for a male cat, Guinness passed away after 16 years with me. I still miss him. I'm glad that after a rough start in his first 4 years of life, I was able to give him a long stretch of comfort and love. Even though he was tough and strong, Guinness could be skittish at times. I always figured it was because of whatever he went through before I adopted him. But one thing about him was reliable. If he saw or sensed something he didn't like, he reacted. He would growl, hiss, or make deep, uneasy sounds. He was like an early warning system for anything strange. Late one hot summer night, sometime around 11 p.m., I was in my bedroom. Earlier that day, I had installed an air conditioner in the center window, and the cool air felt great after the heat. Guinness was lying on the bed behind me, relaxed. Then he suddenly got up. He walked over to the center window with the AC unit and sniffed around it. That alone wasn't too odd, but what he did next caught my attention. He left that window and went into my closet. Inside the closet, there's a smaller window looking out toward the street and the fields. He jumped up into the sill of that window. A moment later, he let out a deep growl. Guinness almost never growled like that. It was a low, rumbling sound that only came out when something was really bothering him or when he sensed a real threat. Hearing it made my stomach clench. "What's wrong, Gin?" I asked. He didn't look back at me. He just growled again, eyes fixed outside. His tail flicked sharply back and forth, another sure sign he was tense or angry. I stood up and walked over to the closet. I knelt beside him and looked out the window. Our house is 3 stories tall, and my bedroom is on the 2nd floor. So from there, I have a good view of old Farmer Reed's hayfield across the street and the little patch of woods next to it. Both my closet window and center window give a broad overhead view of the road and the land across from the house. When I followed Guinness's stare, I saw something sitting in the middle of the street under a street lamp. Another pale creature. This one, however, was much smaller than the first one I had seen up near the club. It was tiny, around the size of a newborn human baby, maybe even slightly smaller. It sat there in the center of the road, still and pale in the streetlight. "Holy shit," I whispered. Guinness gave a softer growl beside me, as if he agreed with that reaction. Strangely, I wasn't as scared this time as I had been before. Maybe having Guinness there helped, or maybe the creature's smaller size made it feel a little less threatening. A part of me was even excited. I thought this might be my chance to get proof, maybe a picture I could show other people. I grabbed my old flip phone and tried to take a few photos. Unfortunately, the camera on that phone was awful in low light. Every shot came out blurry, grainy, and completely useless. You couldn't make anything out clearly. After a few tries, I gave up on getting a picture. So instead, Guinness and I just watched. We stayed there at the window for about a minute, maybe a little more, watching that small, pale figure. It sat in the road, still but not lifeless, like it was listening or waiting. Then it began to move its head, turning slowly as if scanning its surroundings. Suddenly, it jerked its head toward Farmer Reed's hayfield, then turned its body in that direction and scurried off the road, running into the field and disappearing into the tall grass. That was enough to get me moving as well. I hurried downstairs, stepped outside, and walked toward the road. When I reached the middle of the street, I looked over at the field where it had run. I could see the faint shape of Guinness in the upstairs closet window, his body just visible as he continued looking out, tracking something with his eyes. I walked to the edge of the hayfield and stopped where my yard ended and the field began. It wasn't too dark to see. The moon was out, giving everything a pale glow, and I had a small flashlight with me too. I could have walked into the field if I wanted to, but then I heard something. From somewhere inside the field came a series of high-pitched clicking sounds. They echoed in a weird way, bouncing back from the grass and trees. The clicks came from more than one direction, not just from the spot where the small creature had run. It sounded like several sources. The noise reminded me of someone clicking their tongue rapidly against the roof of their mouth, but amplified and layered, faster and sharper, with an otherworldly echo to it. The clicking continued, quick and constant, a strange chorus of tiny, sharp sounds. As I stood there listening, the clicking slowly seemed to move farther away, fading toward the deeper parts of the field and the woods beyond. That was enough for me. I decided I didn't need to go any closer. I turned around and walked back toward my house. When I reached the front door and opened it, Guinness was right there waiting for me, framed in the hallway. He let out a loud, irritated meow. "Hey, handsome, I'm okay," I told him. He didn't seem satisfied with that answer. As I stepped past him, he followed close to my heels. Then he suddenly reached out with one paw, lightly hooked me on the back of my right foot with a claw, and gave me a small, quick bite near my Achilles tendon. "Ow," I said, more surprised than hurt. He just looked up at me, tail flicking. I bent down to give him a quick scratch, and then headed back upstairs, with him trotting behind me. That little claw and bite combo was something he did when he was annoyed with me or wanted to tell me I'd done something dumb. In this case, it felt very much like his way of saying, "That was stupid. Don't do it again." I couldn't completely disagree. After that, I decided the night had been exciting enough. I went to bed and tried to sleep. Time moved on, and by mid-August, summer was starting to tilt toward its later half. One Saturday morning, I was getting ready for my early shift at FedEx in Chicopee, Massachusetts. At the time, I worked as a packer on a 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. My schedule ran from Tuesday to Saturday, with Sundays and Mondays off, unless a holiday changed things. It was an okay job, decent pay, decent benefits for what it was, even if some coworkers could be hard to deal with. That morning, it was around 1:30 a.m., still totally dark outside. I got into my car, started it up, and backed out of the driveway across the street from my house. As my headlights swept across the road in front of me, they lit up something on the left side of the street, near my neighbor's yard. There was a very flat, very dead squirrel lying on the road. It had clearly been hit earlier by a car, probably sometime that evening or night. That part wasn't unusual. Sadly, roadkill is a common sight. I shifted into drive and started slowly pulling forward. Then, suddenly, I slammed on the brakes. I braked hard, harder than I needed to physically, but my body reacted before I really thought. Because right then, I saw something reach out of the darkness at the edge of my neighbor's yard. A long, skinny, pale, clawed hand shot out from the shadows. It looked exactly like the hand of the creature I had seen earlier in the summer, those long fingers, those dark claws. The hand darted out quickly, grabbed the dead squirrel, and yanked it off the road and into the darkness. The whole motion took less than a second. If I hadn't been looking straight ahead, I might have missed it entirely. I pulled the car up a little farther and stopped where the squirrel had been. I rolled my window down and looked. The squirrel was gone. Completely. No scraps, no half-eaten remains, nothing. All that was left was a smear of blood on the pavement where its body had been. I rolled the window back up and continued on my drive to work. I didn't have time to sit there and process everything if I wanted to be on time, but the image of that pale hand grabbing the carcass stayed with me all morning. That quick glimpse told me something important. Those creatures eat meat. They are carnivores, at least partly. From what I saw, they seemed to feed on small animals, or at least they weren't above scavenging roadkill. I could only hope that was the limit of their hunting habits. The idea that they might set their sights on something bigger, like me, or especially pets like Gaius, was not something I wanted to dwell on. After that, I never saw any of the pale creatures again in person. No more figures in the woods, no more small ones sitting in the middle of the road, no more hands grabbing things from the darkness at the edge of the yard. However, for a couple of years after 2016, whenever I took late-night walks or found myself near the woods after dark, I would sometimes hear that same strange clicking sound again. It always came from deeper in the forest, from places I had no interest in entering at night. I never saw anything when I heard it. The clicking would echo briefly and then fade, but it was enough to remind me they were still out there somewhere, watching from a distance and choosing not to show themselves. From 2016 up to now, December 2025, the area around my home has changed. Some of the land has been developed. Farmer Reed sold his property, and part of it was used to build a short row of new houses on my street. Because of that, the small patch of woods and some of the hayfield closest to my house are gone. The new houses are not ugly or poorly built. They look nice, and there's still tall grass behind them. Another portion of the old field was bought by a different farmer, who uses it for crops again. A few of the original trees from the old patch of woods are still standing too. Up near the club, some clear cutting has happened as well. They removed some old, dead trees along the paths under the power lines and cleared one area to make it easier for hikers to get through. I didn't love seeing those changes, but nature has a way of bouncing back. New growth has already started filling in some of the gaps. Meanwhile, my own life changed as well. I got a job in town that pays better than my old one at FedEx and comes with better benefits. With all the added human activity, more houses, more people, more lights, more noise, I believe those creatures moved on. They never struck me as the type to seek out people. If anything, they seemed cautious and observant. I think they retreated deeper into the forest, farther away from neighborhoods, roads, and streetlights. That's probably the best thing for everyone. The last time I heard the clicking sound was in 2023. Since then, nothing. No strange noises, no pale shapes, no more black eyes shining in the dark. It feels like they went as far back into the wild as they could, putting as much distance between themselves and us as possible. I'm relieved about that. I really am. I'd hate to imagine what might happen if some armed, eager member from the club stumbled across one, especially a younger, smaller one, like the baby-sized creature I saw in the road. The outcome wouldn't be good for anyone. In the last few years, I've noticed something else around my neighborhood. There seem to be more squirrels and rabbits than before. With at least one kind of predator gone, or at least not as close, the smaller animals have had more freedom to multiply. Honestly, I don't mind it. I enjoy watching them when they run around the yards and fields. So that's my story. Those are my encounters with the pale creatures that shared my area for a while. If you ever find yourself near deep woods at dusk or later, and you hear an odd clicking sound from somewhere in the dark trees, my advice is simple. Stay calm, don't go toward it, and walk the other way. These things, whatever they are, seem to prefer distance. If you give them space, it seems like they'll give you space too. And one last piece of advice, if you live near thick woods or open fields, keep small pets inside at night. You never really know what might be out there watching from the shadows. I live in Canada, on land that once belonged to the Ojibwe and Cree, the same people who told stories for generations about the Wendigo, a being that was once human but twisted into a hungry, flesh-eating creature during hard northern winters. Around here, that story is more than just old folklore. It sits in the back of people's minds, especially when the cold months roll in. My family has had several encounters with something that matches what people would call a Wendigo. Most of those moments, the close calls, the fear, the nights that never really leave you, belong to me. Other people can believe or not believe, however they want. I know what I saw, and my kids and their kids will know these stories too. The oldest story in my family goes back to my grandfather. It happened sometime in the 1960 seconds, or early 1970 seconds, out in the woods stretching behind our family's land. Those woods, according to him, once held an old Ojibwe village. The people had left long ago, driven out after a brutal winter that many blamed on a wendigo stalking the edge of the settlement and bringing sickness, fear, and hunger. One winter afternoon, my grandfather took his old snowmobile out for a ride in those woods. The machine was ancient, even then loud, rattling, coughing smoke, but he loved it. He knew the back trails better than anyone, especially the narrow paths nobody else bothered with. That day, he was weaving through one of those thin, frozen tracks, just enjoying the quiet, when something jumped out of the thick brush ahead of him. At first, he thought it might be a person, because it was standing upright, but nothing about it looked right. The skin was pale, almost white, stretched tight over a very thin frame. It had no clothes. The arms and legs were long and skinny, too long for a normal human body. In its face were sunken yellow eyes that seemed to glow faintly against the snow and dull winter light. My grandfather was a stubborn, fearless man. He didn't slow down. He only swerved a little, gunned the engine, and drove past the figure as quickly as he could. As his headlights scraped across the place where it had been standing, he saw something else, patches of red on the snow. Blood, clearly visible against the white. For reasons nobody but him would truly understand, he didn't stop to check. He just told himself it was probably from an animal, maybe a deer someone shot, and kept driving deeper into the woods. After about an hour of riding, he decided to set up camp and spend the night out there. He built a small fire, ate, drank a little, and eventually crawled into his sleeping bag. The woods around him were quiet, the kind of deep winter silence where the snow absorbs every sound. He woke sometime around 3 in the morning with a strange feeling like the air had shifted, like the night itself was different. He stepped out of the tent to take a leak, his breath fogging in front of him as the freezing air hit his face. That's when he noticed it. Blood again. This time, the stains were near his camp. The blood wasn't fresh. It was dark and clotted, frozen into the crust of the snow, the edges turning almost black. He looked around, expecting to see tracks leading to or from the spot. There were none, only his own boot prints and the marks from his snowmobile. The rest of the area was untouched, like the blood had simply appeared there without anything leaving it. Then he heard a sound cut through the silence. It was a shriek, not like a person yelling, not like a normal animal call. It was high-pitched and sharp, almost metallic, with an animal wildness behind it. It echoed through the trees in a way that made it hard to tell where it was coming from. He turned toward the sound, and in the dim orange flicker of his dying campfire, he saw it again. The same figure. It stood just beyond the reach of the firelight, in the line of shadow where the trees began. Pale, tall, thin, with those faintly glowing eyes watching him. Something hung from its mouth. My grandfather used to say it looked like a hand, limp and dangling between its teeth. But he was never fully sure because of the darkness and the distance. He didn't try to get a closer look. He moved fast. He threw his food back into his pack, grabbed his rifle, kicked snow onto the fire, and jumped on his snowmobile. The engine roared to life, and he tore out of there as fast as the old 440 would go, racing through the dark forest, the freezing wind biting his face the whole way home. My father told me that story years later, after my grandfather had already passed on. I wanted to believe it, but hearing it secondhand made it feel distant, more like a campfire tale than something real. Still, the details stuck with me. They came back to me later, when my own encounters started. The first one happened when I was about 13. Like a lot of kids who grow up in the north, I loved my sled. I used it all winter, riding as far back into the trails as I dared. One cold afternoon, I went deeper into the woods than I usually did, farther than I knew I should go. The snow was thick and heavy, and the air held that strange quiet you only get when everything is buried under it. The sound of the engine and the sled's treads seemed to be swallowed up before they could echo. I was moving slowly on an old trail when I noticed bright red spots against the snow ahead of me. At first, I thought it was trash or a plastic bag blown from a truck, but as I got closer, it became clear it was blood. There were 3 bloody patches along the trail, spaced apart. Near each one lay a deer carcass. All 3 deer were ripped apart in almost the exact same way. Deep, long gashes ran down their sides as if something with claws had slashed them open. The bodies looked like they had been torn apart before they had fully bled out, like whoever or whatever did it didn't wait for them to die. One deer's rib cage was exposed, the bones white and stained with red. Its legs were twisted backward at unnatural angles. It was the ugliest, most violent scene I had ever come across in the wild. As I sat there, straddling my sled, trying to understand what I was seeing, the smell hit me. The stench of rotting meat, heavy and thick, crawled into my nose and throat. It was so strong it made my stomach turn and my eyes water. Then I realized I wasn't alone. At first, it was a sound something like a deep, drawn-out hiss echoing through the trees. I turned my head toward it, squinting between 2 large pine trunks ahead of me. That's when it stepped out. A tall, thin figure slid from between the trees into the open trail. It was pale, towering much higher than any human being. Its skin was almost translucent, like thin ice, with blue veins visible underneath. It looked like a body that had been stretched too far, like it wasn't meant to be that height. Its eyes were set deep, glowing with that same dull, sick yellow my grandfather had described. Blood streaked its face and chest, smeared across its white skin in rough lines and patches. Its arms hung down with long, bony fingers that ended in sharp, claw-like tips. Those hands were stained and caked with dried blood, fresh blood, dirt, and snow, all mixed into a thick mess. And it was only about 10 yards away from me. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. I just stared. My body wouldn't move. It felt like my nerves had been cut. The creature stared back at me, and then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out was a shriek that tore through the quiet. It had something human in it, and something animal, like a scream and a roar put together and twisted. My vision blurred, my mind blanked, and everything went dark. The next thing I remember is waking up in my own bed at home. Outside, there were 10 inches of new snow on the ground. My sled was parked out by the shed, scratched up like it had been dragged across rocks or hard ice. Later, my father told me he found me half buried in the snow outside the shed early that morning, half frozen but still breathing. He had no idea how I got there. I said nothing about what I had seen. I couldn't find the words, and even if I had, I didn't think anyone would believe me. A year or 2 passed. I tried to push the memory away, to tell myself I had fainted or gotten lost, that maybe I imagined parts of it. Then came another encounter, and this one still twists my stomach when I think about it. My best friend Tom was staying over for the weekend. My parents were out of town. It was just the 2 of us at the house, exactly how we liked it: loud music, video games, junk food, no rules. After hours of playing, we got hungry and went to the kitchen to make some food. The kitchen has a big window overlooking the open field in front of my property. Beyond that field, at the far edge, the forest begins. Those trees are part of the same stretch of woods my grandfather rode through and where I saw the thing near the deer. Around my property, there's usually a loose group of stray dogs. They're not really owned by anyone, but I feed them sometimes, and they are friendly toward me and my own 2 dogs. They come and go, hanging around the house when they feel like it. That night, I heard barking at the door. When I opened it, all the dogs rushed inside at once, every single one except the smallest one, a little dog I called Buck. The ones inside didn't behave like they normally did. No wagging tails or playful jumping. Instead, they paced, whined, and stayed close to me, pushing themselves against my legs, tugging at my clothes as if trying to pull me away from the doorway. Their eyes were wide, their ears back. I had never seen them so agitated. I locked the door and turned back toward the kitchen. Tom was standing by the window, holding my binoculars. His face was pale and tight. "Come here," he said, his voice low and serious. I walked over, and he handed me the binoculars without taking his eyes off the field. I raised the lenses and looked. There, out in the open field, stood the same kind of creature I had seen in the woods years before. The same pale, stretched thin frame. The same sunken, yellow glowing eyes. The same long, clawed hands. It was unmistakable. It was crouched over something. Under the moonlight, I saw a small shape pinned beneath it. It took me a second to realize what it was. Buck. The little dog was wriggling weakly under the creature's grip. He was alive, but barely. His body twisted and kicked, and now and then he let out a high-pitched yelp that reached us even through the walls. The Wendigo looked up from Buck and turned its gaze toward the house. Its eyes locked onto the kitchen window. Deep yellow flared across the distance, and for a moment, through the binoculars, it felt like there was nothing between us. No glass, no air, no field. Then it did something I wish I could forget. It tilted its head a little to one side, slow and deliberate, and the corners of its mouth pulled up into a thin, cold smile. It was mocking me. It knew I was watching and enjoyed it. Behind me, the room had gone completely quiet. The dogs that had rushed in before were now silent, standing rigid, their ears flattened. Even my own 2 dogs, who were usually brave and loud, stayed still, shaking but not barking. I lowered the binoculars for a second, trying to catch my breath. Buck's cries grew louder, more desperate. I looked again and saw the Wendigo adjust its grip on him, those long fingers wrapping around his body like he weighed nothing. Then it started walking toward the house. The field between my front door and the tree line is about 3 miles across. I've walked it enough times to know that distance very well. There is no way anything should be able to cross it quickly on foot, especially not through snow. But within minutes, it had cut the distance to less than 20 yards. My sense of time completely broke. It felt impossible, but I was watching it happen. It moved with a strange gliding speed, like every step covered more ground than it should have. Buck dangled from its hand, still alive, still making broken, thin sounds. Then, it did something that made my blood run cold in a new way. It swung its arm and threw Buck. The little dog's body flew through the air and slammed into the front door with a thud so hard we heard it clearly from the kitchen. I shouted and ran toward the door, my instinct to open it and grab him as fast as I could. But the dogs inside blocked me. They rushed in front of the door, teeth bared, bodies rigid. They snapped and grabbed at my sleeves and pant legs, pulling me back, refusing to let me near the door. They weren't trying to attack me. They were trying to stop me. Buck cried from outside, high and weak, but I couldn't get to him without forcing my way through every terrified animal in that room. I stopped, because I realized that opening that door might mean letting something much worse inside. Tom and I slid down onto the floor, where we could see the door and part of the window, but not be seen easily from outside. We sat there, holding our breath, listening. Then we smelled it. That same stench from the deer trail, the thick, rotting smell of decay and old blood, slipped in through the cracks around the door frame. It was faint at first, then stronger. We knew what that meant. It was right outside. The dogs grew still, low growls rumbling in their chests. Their eyes were fixed on the door. We didn't move. I could hear my own heart pounding. We waited. Slowly, the smell began to fade. The growls softened, then stopped. The dogs' bodies relaxed, though they still watched the door. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to stand up and look toward the window. Out at the far edge of the field, near the trees, I saw a shadow slipping behind the bushes. The Wendigo had covered all that distance back to the forest in just seconds. Buck was nowhere to be seen. That night, something became very clear to me. It hadn't come for the dogs. Buck was nothing more than bait, a way to scare me and drag me toward the door. It had come for me. The creature wanted me to step outside. It wanted me close. And when I didn't give it what it wanted, it left, but not before making sure I understood that it knew exactly where I lived and who I cared about. The last encounter I've had so far happened early in 2025, during the first few weeks of the year. By then, I'd learned how to live with the fear. When winter came, I expected the unease, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. I tried to go on with my life anyway. That year, I planned a camping trip with some friends about 10 miles away from my home. We wanted a simple weekend campfire, beer, stories, and fresh air. Deep down, though, I felt watched before we even left. The first night at camp was normal. We laughed, ate, and slept without anything strange happening. But each morning after that, the air felt heavier. I'd catch flashes of movement between the trees that didn't match the wind. The edges of camp sometimes carried a faint smell, rotting meat, frozen blood, something that didn't belong to our food or our trash. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was letting old memories control me. But a part of me knew better. It hadn't come that far out into the woods to kill me, at least not right away. It felt more like it was following me for sport, watching how I reacted, testing me. After a couple of days, my nerves were worn thin. I told my friends I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home early. They were disappointed, but understood. I packed my things, got into my truck, and drove back. That sense of being followed growing stronger the closer I got to my property. When I pulled into my driveway, I stopped cold. Something was wrong with the house. As I got out and walked closer, I saw dark stains smeared across the siding. Blood, a lot of it. My stomach flipped. When I reached the front steps, I saw what the blood belonged to. A moose. A huge, mutilated moose carcass had been thrown or dropped over the roof and porch. Its body was ripped open, organs spilled, frozen in place on the boards and shingles. Chunks of flesh clung to the eaves and railing. Whatever had done this had enough strength to lift and fling an animal that size like it was nothing. The head was missing. Then I saw the front door. Hanging from the handle by a length of torn tissue or muscle was a dead mourning dove. Its wings were spread, stiff in death, feathers matted with blood. Mourning doves have always been my favorite birds. I used to feed them near the house, listening to their soft calls in the morning. Seeing one dead, displayed like that on my door, felt like a message. A gift, a threat, or both. That night, I didn't waste any time. I gathered all the sage, tobacco, and cedar I had on hand. I built a huge fire outside and burned the herbs, letting the smoke drift over the house, the yard, and the edge of the trees. I walked the property line, praying the protection prayers my elders had taught me, asking the spirits for help, for safety, for distance from whatever was coming around me. The fire burned late into the night. The smoke clung to my clothes and hair. The smell of sage and cedar mixed with the fading scent of blood and rot. Since that night, I haven't seen the Wendigo again. But that doesn't mean it has left my life. Not a single night passes that I don't think about it at least once. Winter makes it worse. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I heard faint footsteps crunching in the snow outside my window. Sometimes, just for a moment, I think I smell that same sickly sweet rot in the air before it disappears again. The house is quiet. The field is calm. Life goes on. But I live with the knowledge that somewhere out there, in those northern woods and deep snow, something remembers me. Something that was once human and is now something else. Something that feeds on flesh and fear and memories. I worry that one day it will come back. That it will decide the game has gone on long enough. That it will break down my door, drag me into the freezing dark, and leave what's left of me out in the open for others to find. Maybe then someone else will start to tell the story, the way my family has for years. Because that's one of the strangest parts about the Wendigo. It doesn't just feed on bodies, it feeds on stories, on being remembered. Once you've seen those yellow eyes and heard that shriek in the dead of winter, the creature doesn't just live in the woods anymore. It lives in your mind, in your fear, and in every word you pass down to the next generation. Thanks for spending your night with True Nightmares. If these stories helped you relax, hit like and subscribe, and pick the next episode on your screen so the creepy stories can keep playing while you fall asleep.